Welcome to Dangos, the webinar. Dangos, as you all know, is intended to try and keep people up to date with what help's available in Wales, financial help for people who are in need. We do that mainly through the online training sessions that we do. This year we're offering kind of basic courses and also intermediate courses. And for the intermediate courses with in-house teams in place, we also have very slightly tweaked them so that there are versions that are perhaps of more interest to people who have an interest in benefits or housing or social care or health. And of course, then the information packs that support those. We also have a couple of new things we'll talk a little bit more about at the end, our forum, and of course these webinars. We thought it was going to be useful through both the forum and the webinars to be able to provide somewhere that people can go to ask for more information or help or where to find support. And today's session is being given by Tom Masser, and we're going to be looking at the benefit changes that are happening and may happen in Wales, and some other kinds of useful and interesting pieces of information that will help you to help the people that you meet. So I'm going to pass over initially to Tom, and at the end of that session, the second part will be relating to kind of questions from people attending the webinar. And if you could answer, if you could type into the chat your questions, then Sam will collate those and pass them on to us at the end so that we can provide the answers in a fairly kind of consistent way. That will mean we shouldn't get lots of multiple types of questions being bombarded with us. So do please put any other comments or anything into the chat as well we can look at later on. And with that, I'll pass you over to Tom.
Okay, Josh, Gareth, thanks everyone for turning up. And I hope it'll be useful. It's a mixture, as Gareth was saying, of actual changes that have happened. So it's a bit of a catch up, particularly the big stuff will be the November budget. So we'll run through those things as well. But also some of the things that are in the background that may or may not turn out to be, but part of the environment at the moment that might be affecting people in coming months, part of the sort of debate without getting too heavily into the debate as such. So if my clickers work, the times they are changing, a whistle-stop tour of recent forthcoming changes in the benefit system. So let's start off with a little bit about disability benefits. And if you excuse me a moment, I'll just turn off my central heating, which is trying to make an entrance. It will stop whirring in the background. So one change is the terminal illness rules. This is where it gets a bit techie, so I'm going to avoid getting too techie, but it's a sort of interesting area of some of the problems of administering a benefits rule and the changes that are happening. Now, the big change that is happening is that what used to be thought of as 6 months has now become 12 months. And it's the process of doing that has been staggered because it's much easier to do it for the benefits to do with sickness, like employment support allowance and universal credit, because you can just change the regulations, which is a quick legal process.
Do you want to explain, Tom, what the 6 months was actually for?
Oh, right, yeah. So the I was gonna come back on that one, but what the rule used to say was that death could be reasonably expected within 6 months. That was the old definition of terminal rules. Of terminal illness, and it's now become what is with death could reasonably be expected within 12 months. And those time limits are a little bit vague, as I'll come on to, a bit misunderstood. So we've got this dual process. So the ESA and universal credit, they've changed to 12 months quite quickly. Disability benefits required primary legislation, so a bit of an act of parliament change going on. And that's been done in October, but there is still some regulatory work to do. So they haven't quite yet happened. They'll be coming along quite soon. Haven't quite got a date for that. so the focus that 6 and 12 months encourages people, when you read that, to think, oh, well, that means somebody's got a definite prognosis of 6 months or now 12 months. And that's what the definition is, because that gives you something to decide whether somebody's eligible or not. The trouble is, in practice, those of you who may be working in this area may know that actually getting a prognosis out of a consultant is not like in the films. How long have I got, doc? Sometimes it can happen that way, but mostly it's kind of, well, it all depends, if this, if that, and so on. So then very rarely is a hard and fast diagnosis or prognosis of less than 6 or now less than 12 months. So what we've had because of that is we've had the case law has been applied, and the same case law applies to the 12 months as the 6 months. And what that case law essentially says is, would it be a surprise if somebody were to succumb to their illness within 12 months? Let's use the current definition to avoid confusion. If it's a possibility, but there may still be realistic hopes that somebody may have a good deal longer than that, then yes, they would still qualify. That's the bit where overemphasizing the time bit can lead us into difficulties. So in practice, what you'll get if you push your consultant for a prognosis, you might get quite a wide timeline of what may happen. You may be having some palliative chemo or something like that, which may or may not work effectively, or as the case may be. The actual awards of under these special rules are actually made for 3 years at a time. So that gives you a sense that they are longer than 12 months. And at the end of those 3 years, you can renew that test, renew that application. If looking ahead, doesn't matter the fact you survived that journey so far, but if looking ahead, it would not be a surprise were you to succumb in the next 12 months, then you could have a new award under the special rules. So that's how that sort of goes on. I mean, this is not really relevant to us in Wales, but in Scotland, they'd already changed their disability payments because they're devolved. They don't actually have a time limit at all. They leave it as a clinical opinion, and they've got their own certificate. So sorry about all the mentions of different certificates going on. The current situation for Wales and England is that we have 2 different certificates going on. The traditional certificate, which will be absolutely fine for all of the benefits if someone fits the 6-month rule. And we got a separate one for the 12-month rule, which only applies to universal credit and ESA. A bit of a technical nightmare. What I'm suggesting, though, is in practice, there isn't really a need for these 2 certificates because it makes no real difference between 6 and 12 months. What it does do is the 12 months is more fitting with the hospital view, the clinical view. The consultants will be more comfortable and GPs more comfortable with the 12 month. So it's a techie small area, but apologies for that. I'll get less techie as we proceed. What's happening with disabilities generally? Well, there's been a huge disability benefits. So those are the extra benefits paid on top of anything else for child disability living allowance, personal independence payment, if you're working age when you apply, an attendance allowance if you're over working age. Now, what's happened, particularly with PIP, is there's been a massive increase, personal independence payment, been a massive increase in new claims. Being interesting as to why that's happened. Is it because people are getting more unwell with longer waiting lists? Is it because there's been, during the lockdown, there was difficulty accessing advice? All sorts of, there could be some useful research as to why there's been a jump of 50%. That's been a challenge for the Department of Work and Pensions to process those claims. Quite rightly, they're prioritising those and also prioritising situations where people have deteriorated and perhaps need to apply for a higher level than they're already getting. Now, that's great, but of course, that means that the resources are being pulled out a little bit from the other parts of the work, and in particularly, when you get an award perhaps for 2 or 3 years and you're coming towards the end of that award and you'd like to carry on because you've still got those long-term health issues or disabilities affecting you, then the application process that's where the slowdown is happening there. What the DWP were doing was sending people a letter. Look, your award date is extended for 3 months. Don't worry, we'll come back to you. And then people were then getting worried towards the end of the 3 months. They get another letter saying it's extended for another 3 months and so on. So I think quite wisely they've decided, look, we're going to send a letter and extend everybody 12 months. And hopefully we don't have to send anybody another letter extending it again. We'll get it done within the 12 months, hopefully a lot sooner. So that's the process there. We've also got, it got delayed by the pandemic, a process of people switching from the old adult disability living allowance over to personal independence payment. There's still about 375,000 people across the UK. The idea was to restart that, but that process hasn't restarted, and that's now been put on hold. It will not restart until 2028, and then those remaining people will switch over. So a lot of people will still be remaining on adult disability living allowance, people who were working age at the time in 2013 when PIP came along. In terms of the assessments, well, in sort of the general theme is getting back to business as usual within the Department of Work and Pension. So we're getting reassessments are coming back on and so forth. But during the pandemic, a lot of lessons were learnt about using phone and video as alternatives. And at the moment, although face-to-face with a health professional are back on the agenda, 75% of assessments are now done by phone or video. So I did ask a group of advisors, did they think that was a good or bad thing? On the one hand, it could be a lot more convenient for people that they don't get themselves to a test centre or arrange for a home visit, and they might feel less intimidated perhaps by doing it over the phone or the video. On the whole, though, the feeling was that despite that convenience possibility, the clients were feeling a bit less heard in the process. And the advisors were feeling that the quality of reports was being affected because there is something you pick up from the non-verbal cues and so on. When you've got somebody actually with you, that will be the ideal. And a similar experience seems to be applying for tribunals, which have also been using phone and video in order to just keep going at all during the lockdown process. But is this a useful time-saving process, or does it get in the way? The mandatory reconsideration, there was a lot of talk. It's been a bugbear for advisors that the success rate at appeals for disability benefits is very high, about 70%. And often, there could be all sorts of research as to why that happens. But it's much higher than it ever used to be. And there's a bit of frustration. Wouldn't it be good if somehow we could get more decisions changed earlier on? That's certainly what the Tribunal Service have been asking the Department of Work and Pensions. Could you not, perhaps, because sometimes a case arrives at appeal, there is new evidence, there is a first time to actually talk to the client and so on, and that can swing the difference, which is not available to the department. But at other times, it's actually just a rerunning of exactly the same evidence that was before the decision maker earlier on. So could we change that? And there was a lot of consideration. I spoke to somebody in the DWP headquarters who was full of enthusiasm about ways that we could look wider at the evidence, perhaps look a bit beyond the medical reports, take in other evidence, try and have put a bit more resource into looking at mandatory reconsiderations. So everyone was quite excited when the success rate, the change rate at mandatory reconsideration leapt up from about 15-20% to closer to 50%. We were thinking, great, this is evidence of that more holistic approach. Unfortunately, not so. It was a technical one, is because a lot of people were late sending back their forms for assessment during the pandemic. So technically they were disallowed, but they were immediately, no, we're not going to disallow you for that because of the situation. So we'll let that go. So a lot of these extra spike was caused by that rather than any fundamental change to the way reconsiderations are done. So that's one for further consideration. Something new coming along is most PIP personal independence payments awards are short term. 2 to 3 years is the most common, but some people get an award for 10 years. And the idea was that come the 10 years, there'll be initial what's called a light touch review, which is basically we're kind of, in making a 10-year award, we're assuming the person is unlikely to be any better. We're just going to check if everything is still the same, that sort of review. The actual process for that hasn't been developed because we haven't needed them, because we're now coming up to that 10-year, because the first PIP awards were back in 2013, and 2023 we'll see the first of these light touch reviews coming along the way. So we'll find out about that process, but that will be happening. The first few will be happening during this year. There's a health transformation program, and that is about trying to join up the administration and the doing of various health assessments. The two main areas of benefit are the sickness ones, where the work capability assessment, whether you're fit for work or not, or to what level you're fit for work, and the disability assessments, which is regardless of whether you can work or not. That's on for the disability benefits, which could be on top. You could be in full-time work and get a disability benefit, for example. So you've got two completely different test regimes at the moment, two different contracts, two different groups doing them. So in Wales, we've got Capita doing PIP, and we've got Maximus doing the work capability assessment. Those contracts are due to carry on until 2024, but the idea is to start up the new contracts, a unified contract for a single provision. They're out for bidding at the moment, so that the old and the new can work together a bit like sort of shadow, to ease the transition over. The assessments are going to remain separate. At one point it was thought, could we actually do the same assessment, asking two very different sets of questions at the same time? And they tried that out and they thought, no, this is getting too complicated. So we'll have two separate assessments, but ideally they might happen on the same day to avoid you having to travel twice to the same place. And what we will do is we'll join up the administration behind all of that, so that there'll be one administration, one database with all the information, so that it make it easier to go from information from that's on one set, the work capability assessment, over to PIP and vice versa, so that information can cross between that. A single IT system, more use of evidence there. One case manager will go through the process of both benefits, will have ownership, and a co-location of case managers and health professionals as part of that bid to try and tackle those queries that go on between, to smooth that, to integrate a little bit more, with the aim of getting better decision making. So that is things that are going to emerge, and what will happen is that people will find that the administration should be a bit smoother. And they will also find whether, and they may or may not like this, that they're going to have, if they've got both benefits going on, they might have reassessments the same day, potentially. And there is something to be said for some clients that I've only got one in the balance at one time, sort of thing, and it feels safer that way. Just a word about Scotland. Now, Scotland has devolved powers over disability benefits. So why am I talking about them for an audience in Wales? Well, just to be aware, because it raises questions for us too. It's a different path, but it's relevant to the rest of UK, because we may have clients who might happen to be coming from Scotland with a Scottish disability benefit, so it's useful for us to know about it, or who might be moving to Scotland. But also, it's going to be a very similar system, as I'll explain in a moment, but it might work slightly differently. There may be things that seem to work better in Scotland or that are worse in Scotland. And we could, it's good to keep an eye on that, because that will inform any policy debate operating in Wales. And whether or not Wales should try and seek devolved powers, or have some influence to see if we can do a slight compromise and have a sort of Welsh approach to the disability benefits, even with them not being devolved. All those options are there. So what's happening up in Scotland? Don't worry too much about the detail. You can look this up if you ever need to know about precisely. But the child disability living allowance has now been replaced by a child disability payment, and PIP, personal independence payment, has now become adult disability payment. over those two borders, and they're now fully rolled out for new claims. So if you apply for a disability benefit in Scotland, it will be for either CDP or ADP. If you're over pension age, they're still running attendance allowance. That will switch over in due course. But the first two have fully switched over. The existing claims, people who are on child DLA and PIP will just switch over automatically. They won't have to do any reassessment. They will move over to the equivalent rate of adult disability payment. And that is designed to be as easy as possible, because the criteria, the basic test, the point systems, the approach, the case law, everything is identical to the benefits that were there before. Plenty of people in Scotland who are on child DLA. There are a few differences, but nothing major. I won't go into broadly, they're exactly the same benefits. Interestingly, some advisors in Scotland were thinking that they were noticing a higher rate of refusals of personal independence payment in these recent months. And their conspiracy theory that advisors love to have, well, they were wondering if it was the hope that people, now that adult disability payment is ready for claiming, people might just say, oh, I didn't get anywhere with PIP, I'll forget about PIP and I'll apply for adult disability payment instead. But it could be just advisors being a cynical bunch, as they often are. So it's the same basic criteria, but what is meant to change, and we'll see the devil will be in the detail, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. The whole tone and approach, the aim of the change is to do things with dignity, fairness and respect written on the logo of Social Security Scotland, but also in practice to be more open, holistic and so on. You can see on the blue there, that will get you a link to the government, to the Scottish government, if you're interested, overview of what they are changing, if you like. But broadly, what that means is in Scotland, they'll be doing more choices of how you claim the benefit. So you can do it in person, you can get a form, you can do it online, you can do it by phone. So the option is down to the claimant how they wish to do it. If they go into a Social Security Scotland, have an appointment, they will do the form for them, or they may suggest refer them to an advisor instead. Once they get through, they'll have the similar kind of form. I've had a look, I'm going to have a detailed look because I've got to write about both forms. It looks very similar, the big form you have to fill in. It might be a bit different in some places, but it's exactly the same art and test to fill in. But what then happens is the idea is that the form will carry a bit more weight, obviously depending on how consistent it is with the medical evidence, and that they will look first to any other evidence, whether it's some health professionals involved in the care and so on. Only as a last resort will they be using healthcare professional assessments. That's the big change, if you like. How that works out is going to be an interesting lesson. Will people be feeling a beneficial experience up in Scotland? Will they feel, how nice Social Security Scotland are, the DWP, or will they be wishing wistfully for the good old days of the DWP running it? We shall see. If it works out better in Scotland, does that give us any thoughts, food for thought in Wales? While I'm really not going to go into great detail in Northern Ireland, but just to show that devolved differences, we're aware of devolved differences. So there is a review of the peace process. What happened in Northern Ireland is they don't have lots of devolved powers, but they did have a sort of fixed menu as part of the peace agreement, which gave certain changes. And they have a report, the last one was October, and they said carry on with the changes, the various ameliorations and amendments in order to get welfare reform to happen. It happened later in Northern Ireland. So they have various mitigations, as they call it, in Northern Ireland. So those are the proposals. I won't go through them all, but the review, which is a sort of independent statutory review of the process, made certain recommendations, like more support during the 5-week wait, a better start grant for low-income families, a cost of work allowance, various things. You can look them up if you're interested in what they are, but just to show you that there is potential for change. And at the end, we'll look at some of the potential for change. Whether that gets anywhere is a whole other matter. But there is sort of, and those are the kind of things that in Wales we can request potential for change and do certain things, working within the limited powers that we have too. All good stuff, say Northern Ireland advisors. They like the sound of this report, but will it affect Welsh thinking? And will it work whilst the Assembly is a little bit tied up at the moment in Northern Ireland? Okay, moving away from that, deductions and debt. Deductions from benefit. There has been a bit of an issue going on about deductions because of fuel arrears, third-party deductions from your universal credit because you're in arrears with your fuel bills. Lots of people have been getting into arrears with the fuel bills. And I think that basically it's come down to, let's have a conversation before we then make the deduction. There's been a slight trigger happiness that if the fuel provider contacts universal credit will say, okay, we'll sort the amount out and a deduction will be made. But whether some of those deductions are perhaps not affordable, so perhaps there needs to be the conversation, going a three-way conversation there. Breathing space, just a reminder on the breathing space thing. Lots of people may be thinking they could do with some money advice. So we're moving into sort of debt and money advice, and people may be quite reluctant. I can't think about it all. It's all too complicated. Burying your head in the sand. I can't face it all. And anyway, I've tried to of all sorts of different ways to persuade them, and they just keep sending me red letters and penalty notices and so on. So what is the point? And you're trying to convince somebody that there is a point, because there's a huge amount that a money advisor can do when they sit down, go through the whole lot, which is a distressing process. They're not judgmental, all of those wonderful things that we harp on about during the Dangos sessions. But if nothing else, they get a breathing space, which means even if they're not convinced any of these good things you might think suggest would happen are going to happen, at least they get peace for a couple of months whilst a go is had, whilst an advisor has a go with it. This is a take on rents have been going up for everybody, whether you're pensioner or working age, but an interesting take on it, highlighting perhaps a new problem that people hadn't thought about, is the effect on pensioners, but it's affecting working age people too, because rents have been going up hugely. So it's a shelter report generally about the problems created by the rising costs of private sector rents. They're taking off because interest rates went up, and that pushes up costs for private landlords. There's also increased demand because people are no longer able to think about buying their first property or putting it off, then they are renting. At the same time, a lot of landlords are deciding, for whatever reason, there's a pulling out of that market. So there's a supply and demand going on, which meant that rents have gone up by, there are different estimates going on, but 16 to 20%. Rent inflation is much higher than the usual inflation going on. So the local housing allowance did go up. The local housing allowance is a cap on how much help housing benefit or universal credit can give you if you're a private sector tenant. And it did go up quite a big leap back in March 2020 as part of, to avoid people being homeless during the pandemic. But that has not been repeated. It's back to being frozen again at a time when rents are really going up. So there is a big growing problem of affordability of rents. I was startled to read, I think it's a figure that Gareth came up with, that 20% of pensioners are missing out on housing benefit. And that seems surprisingly high to me, having worked in a housing association, because it's such a big bill to pay, but perhaps in private sector, or perhaps people for all sorts of reasons. Be interested to find out that. There's also reports of people who were planning to retire, but they're carrying on working because they just can't figure out how they're going to pay the rent, because their rents have shot up quite dramatically. And some individual increases are far higher than the average 16%. So there's a BBC News report, you can click on that to read it, which is based on a shelter press release. Lots of people are a big increase in over 65s at risk of eviction, the big rise in private rents. and previously people who are just about managing okay are no longer doing so because the rent is piling in alongside the fuel bills and so on. The pension impact may not have been so thought about. They think that older people's housing is a bit more settled, but clearly it seems not. So there's all potential there of campaigns for campaigning groups like Shelter on the general housing crisis and UK housing policy, which probably does need some attention, and also take-up campaigns to make sure people are getting their housing benefit, are getting their pension credit, or are getting discretionary housing payments to top them up. There'll be a big demand, big need for those discretionary housing payments from your local council, which can top up whatever housing benefit and universal credit are willing to pay. I'll come now mainly to the November changes, the budget statement. I pulled together the ones most related to universal credit on this slide, and the next slide, the other changes going on. So for ones affecting universal credit, there's the rollout of the in-work progression offer. Now, this is a gradual rollout, and what exactly that means and what will happen is something that's being developed. So it's being brought forward to September of this year. So we don't have details at the moment as to what's involved. What we do know at the moment is that it's affecting people who are part-time working on universal credit, and what they may or may not have to do, and what universal credit work coaches may be able to offer to progress in work, to earn more money or to take on more hours, what support they can give, or what driving can be done. What we do know is that the administrative earnings threshold sounds a ghastly technical term, but basically that is the level that dictates whether for the rest of your week you count as unemployed or not. So are you sufficiently part-time worked to be left alone to find the hours that suits you, or do you need to do more hours or earn more money and be treated a bit like somebody who's signing on completely as unemployed? And it depends whether your earnings, if your earnings are above this threshold, then you're free to make your own arrangements. If they're below, then you are treated as a bit like a job seeker for the rest of your working week. Obviously, how big their working week is up for negotiation. It may be a full 35 hours. It may be because of your particular needs. Your universal credit work coach says, well, we're talking 20 hours here, whatever, and when you need to move 15 to 20. So that is happening, and that means that a growing number of people are moving from a light touch, gentler version of encouragement to find more work to a bit more the full-on, more intense work search, which would be what a completely unemployed job seeker might face. There is a report that you can get from Manchester Metropolitan University. I've not read it. It's critical of the whole concept, but I'm not going to say anything because I haven't read it, but it's out there should you be interested in looking that up. Apologies for not putting a link to it there. There are changes to the universal credit managed migration process. So that is the process of moving people from the old legacy benefits, the old 6 legacy benefits that are merging into universal credit. And that was due to happen, it was really due to pick up from this month through 2024. That was the main, for those people that hadn't already moved over for other reasons, then people still on the legacy benefits were going to be written to mainly this year and next year to say, now's your time. You've got 3 months to claim universal credit, and that will, and you must do that, otherwise your legacy benefits will come to a stop. That is, in a nutshell, is the process. There's lots of further letters and safety gaps along the way. That process has been delayed. It's not going to pick up until later in the year. So we're really talking 24, 25 when most of that managed migration will happen. However, the big change is that people who are on the sickness route, the income-related employment support allowance, if that is their main benefit, perhaps they're getting housing benefit as well, but if that's their main benefit, then they will not switch until 28, 29. So they will have a lot longer before there's a managed migration, before they start getting letters saying you must switch to universal credit. But if they also happen to be getting child tax credit because they've got a child, then they will be with the mainstream 24-25. The delays could be a good thing. Those of you working with people with mental health issues might feel that might release some anxiety, that I've got to get my head around a completely changed system. Lots of people are finding universal credit's a lot better for them and all that sort of thing. But the worry of change is always a big one. But on the other hand, it could be a loss, and the savings to the Treasury, about £1 billion a year from this delay. Why does that happen? Well, quite a lot of people, if they move over to universal credit, are actually going to be better off, and they're losing out by not switching over. And a managed migration coming early would force you to switch over whether you wanted to or not. On the other hand, some people are going to lose money under universal credit sums compared with how their benefits worked out under the old legacy system. Now, if you get a managed migration over to universal credit, you'll get an extra amount of universal credit should you lose out in the main sums. You'll get a top up to your level in your final month on legacy benefits. What they call a transitional element will be added on. That only applies with these managed migrations, the ones that are yet to come. It doesn't apply to people who move over now, either because they choose to move over or because they have a change of circumstances that requires them to move over. They don't actually get any, don't get the protection. So that's happening. Those are definite changes happening. Some reports around it. The Work and Pension Select Committee, that's an all-party committee of backbench members of Parliament. They're calling for an end of the requirement of parents to pay childcare charges up front. If you're the childcare payment is more generous under universal credit, but the disadvantage compared with the old tax credit regime is parent has to pay the money, then reclaim it from universal credit, and that can cause some major barriers for parents going into work. So could that, the recommendation to the department is to consider finding a way around that. Interesting statistic that we passed the point where 1 million universal credit claimants have the higher level of sickness, what they call limited capability for work-related activity, what in old money used to be called the support group. That was at November 2022, and 271,000. This will be of more interest amongst the more techie people in the audience. The lower level of sickness, where you just have limited capability for work and you still have to do some work-focused activity, that's 271,000. That's the current count at the moment. Another postponement going on. Housing benefit carries on. It's not open to new claims if you're in working age, but it is the benefit you would claim if you're pension age and you need help with rent. You would still go to the council and get housing benefit. That's been delayed, and it's been delayed again. The eventual aim is to merge that into pension credit. That way, housing benefit can then be removed from the statute books entirely. But that's not going to happen now until 2028-29. So that's a postponement there. So for now, older people will claim housing benefit. Some other changes then in that November statement. There was a lot of relief when it was announced that all the benefits are going up by 10.1%. There were various, well, maybe we'll do some, because in the past we've had increases, full increases for some benefits, not others, and so on. They've all gone up by the 10.1%, which is the figure set in September inflation rate, and that is normally what sets the inflation rate for, if that's followed, for the following April's benefits. All of them except bereavement support payment, which comes under a different bit of law and isn't covered by the requirement to be uprated annually and has not been increased since it was introduced. So 10.1%, that's great. And lots of us will be thinking, wouldn't it be lovely if we got 10.1%? But of course, the inflation rate when you are on these levels is a lot higher. When you're on low income, your practical experience of current inflation figure, current officially it's 10.5%, but that means feels more like 16% when a much higher proportion of your income is spent on the basic essentials like food and fuel. And those are the very things that are going up by far more than 10.1%. That's the average. The local housing allowance levels remain frozen, despite the, as I mentioned earlier. The benefits cap That doesn't go up every year. It's been set on a 5-yearly cycle, gets looked up every 5 years. The benefits cap is a limit, no matter what other restrictions are applied. When you get to a total of benefits paid to you, if you get more than the benefits cap and you're hit by the benefits cap, then your money is reduced. That has been increased, not by the 5-year figure, it's been increased by 10.1%. So it's gone up by the same figures. Those are the new figures there on the slide. There won't be a further increase until 2027. So again, a relief for a lot of people who come out of the benefits cap, but they'll go back into it as the years progress. The cost of living payments that we're very familiar with, they're carrying on. There's a repeat exercise, if you like. So just as this year, there will be another £150 in September with the disability payments. There'll be extra amounts on the winter fuel payments for older people. And for people who are on low income benefits, last year there was an extra £650. That is going to be £900 next year. And rather than in 2 instalments, it'll be 3 instalments. As to the exact dates, details will follow as to when they'll happen. And as before, there'll be a cut-off date. You've got to be on the qualifying benefit by then, but of course you can always backdate the payment. So a real incentive, if you're working with older people who are missing out on pension credit, they can backdate 3 months quite easily, and that could bring them in. They think, oh well, I'm not interested, you're going to lose £300. Oh well, okay, I might fill the form in. The energy price guarantee, that's carrying on because it only lasted until April 23. But the typical bill, instead of £2,500, which is the current figure used as a typical bill, that the subsidy will bring it down to, it's going to be a £3,000 typical bill. We'll bring it down to. Of course, that is not actually what the cap is. If you open all the windows, crank up the heating, your bill will be a lot higher than 2,500 or 3,000. It's a subsidy per unit, but that's that broadly is what's going to happen. However, it may not come to that because energy prices are beginning to come down again, the wholesale prices, which will feed through. So it may be that by April, the actual off-gem traditional energy cap might have fallen below the 3,000 anyway. So we'll see as that works. The national minimum wage has gone up almost the same 9.7%, with a bigger increase for younger people. They're trying to level up the rates. So the rate from under 23s has gone up by even more. That's the national minimum wage, the one that's statutory required. The real living wage is a voluntary campaign. People don't have to do it, but employers like to have the badge. We pay the real living wage. It's set slightly higher. The difference is the real living wage is based on a sort of what do people need for a basic income. And so that's going up for £10.90 from age 18 and £11.95 in Greater London. But that's not a statutory obligation on any employers. Support for mortgage interest has changed. It was a sort of, people weren't taking it up that much, but it's there because you had to wait a long time for it, and if you earned anything, then that was it. You couldn't get that help. Now you can get that help if you're earning, and you only have to wait 3 months for it. It's still a loan, not a payment like it used to be, but it now might be an interesting part of the package of support to ease your loan payments if you lose your job, for example. So if you've been ignoring SMI because it doesn't seem to do much, it could do more for certain people. It could actually be more beneficial than some other things. Gareth has an app for that, so I won't say any more than that, and he'll take any questions around that. The household...
You're going to have to speed up quite a lot, Tom, I'm afraid. So.
Okay, sorry, I'll speed up very quickly now. There's an extra household support fund, an extra £1 billion there. Other changes, these aren't changes that are happening definitely, they're changes just background, if you like. So I've left you the links to look at those. There's discussion about bringing forward the age of retirement increase to it's currently 66. It'll be going up to 67 later this decade, 26, 28. But the next increase up to 68, there's talk of bringing that forward. You can see, click on that link and you'll get an Age UK report about the implications of that if that goes ahead. That's not a definite proposal, but it's a kite being flown by the Treasury. Pension credit, there is a legal case going on about delays in pension credit. DWP are feeling they're back on track to mostly get pension credit sorted within the 6-week target. So hopefully people will be experiencing the gain from that. Bereavement support payment, there was a legal case there that changes the bereavement support payment to include people who didn't have a legal tie, who were cohabiting as parents. They now come under bereavement support payment, but the actual mechanism for doing that needs to be put in place. People may have to reapply, details to follow from that. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation do a lot of report. They do an annual report on UK poverty, and it's always a good read if you're into the whole poverty background. It's looking at what's going on. Their big headline concern as far as benefits is that basic benefit rates are close to destitution levels and must be reset. And they've got their list of areas that they would really like to see changed, which are on those bullet points there. But you can see more about that in the report. Some other issues going on, that people were all getting the benefit of £60 a month or so off our energy bills if we're on credit meters. If you're on modern Teco prepayment meters, those meters can automatically be done. But a lot of people on the older prepayment meters, they get a voucher, and there is a bit of an issue going on. 27% of households have not redeemed their voucher. And these by definition are some of the poorest people, because you pay more for the privilege of prepayment. So we're getting, there's an issue there of some of the most vulnerable people not using it. The hope is that people are holding on. Their vouchers last 3 months, but if they're not, or they've forgotten, or they're having problems, there have been some problems issuing them, they're not, you can't cash them at every one of the normal, only certain pay points that you can go to. Those all kind of could be barriers, and people could lose out on the help if they don't cash in. So that is the end of my bit. Sorry for going on so long, but hopefully there are lots of questions that Gareth and I...
There are a few more slides. Do you want me to take over those, Tom?
Oh, right, yes. I do apologise, yep.
Right.
Okay, over to you then.
But very rapidly, just some things that might be of interest and use to people. The broadband social tariff, which is a kind of service run by DWP, allows broadband suppliers to verify whether people are on benefits, and therefore might qualify for any cheaper schemes that the broadband providers are offering. And that could save people up to £100 a year. So if you've got people on benefits who are paying for their broadband, might well be worth making sure that they're checking they're on the cheapest scheme that their supplier offers, because there might be a cheaper scheme simply because they are on benefits, but they need to check on that. Can you grab the next one, Tom?
Yep, certainly.
Universal credit hardship payments. Some people have had to repay hardship payments for universal credit help that they received. Well, there's been a change to kind of the rules there, and there's now a scheme which says that people who've been getting those hardship payments you get when you're sanctioned may actually be able to claim a refund of those repayments if, when they were paying them back, they asked them to stop it and DWP refused. There is a special form that needs to be applied, but you can obviously see that one on the slides and on the recording when you download it later. Next, please. Support for mortgage interest. As Tom said earlier, there's been what's called a zero earnings rule, so you weren't able to claim any help with your mortgage interest payments if you were working. Well, that's changing from April, and the waiting period is changing as well. It's a loan. The support for mortgage interest is a loan, but normally it'll be much cheaper, certainly, than arrears accumulating, and it could provide some immediate help there. Next one again, then. The Welsh Fuel Support Scheme. Well, today's the last qualifying day. You have to have been on one of the means tested or disability benefits between last September or today. So people who claim benefits after today won't qualify for that scheme. It's a £200 payment, and you get it from your local authority. And again, the details can be found on the gov.wales website. And again, we know what the new energy support scheme nationally is going to be coming in next year. So sometime in this year now, coming in this spring, there'll be a £301 payment. Then if you're getting disability benefit, there'll be an extra £150 during the summer. There'll be another £300 for everybody in the autumn, and another £300 on top of that for pensioners during the winter. And finally, the £299 everybody for the third cost of living payment in spring next year. The 299 and the 301 rather than 300 each is there so you can identify what the payment's for. And again, right, a bit of information for you. We now have a new Dangos forum at dangos.wrac.wales. And the idea is that, like these webinars, it's there to provide with some news and information, but also to allow people to post questions and inquiries and so forth. So I encourage you all to register for that. It's where you'll find, for example, all the latest information packs and the download of the recording of today's webinar will be on there as well. So that's dangos.wrac.wales will take you to that. And the next one, just reminder, if you've got colleagues that haven't been on Dangos sessions yet, we're running the basic ones and the intermediate ones. Again, just go to dangos.wales or dangos.cymru for the sessions in Welsh. And those are going to be running certainly through for the next couple of months, with lots of dates going up via that Dangos website, and bookable via Eventbrite. And once more, and again, just click through to the end of those. Just reminders, just reminders that what Dangos is there about. We've used up rather more time than we expected for the presentation bit, but we're now open for the questions you've been pouring in to the chat. We've got the next one coming up on February the 28th, our next webinar, by the way, and at the moment that's looking as if it's going to be on the cost of living and ways of helping with it. We've got some requests already in for a session looking at young people and the way benefits work for them. So thank you very much for that. Sam, any questions coming in that we need to deal with in the time that we can overrun a little bit, obviously, in the time that we've got?
I've got one here. When will people be moved onto universal credit?
Right. Well, universal credit, people have been moving onto it for quite some time, but only by what's called natural migration, when their circumstances have changed, and they've had to, if you like, reclaim the benefit. They've gone onto universal credit then. But the managed migration, the one that, as Tom said earlier, is going to be when the protection kicks in, because you're being moved when things haven't changed for you. And if there's a drop in your benefit entitlement, then there'll be this transitional protection. That's starting now. It's starting really on still a very much a pilot basis, sort of test and learn, I think DWP call it. But that's expected to begin to accelerate and to start being applied to more and more people over the next months and years. Now, the DWP's plan for when it's all going to be finished, when everybody's been moved on to universal credit, originally it was going to be 2016. So I'm not convinced by the timetable that's in place now, but I think their current plan is 2027. Tom, am I right?
Well, the hope is that the main one will be before then. I caught it as 25, but again, I take that might be subject. But of course, there is that delay for the people who are moving over from income relief DSA, and that won't finish until 29. So the final end will be 29, when all the old legacy benefits should have nobody on them anymore.
Can I come in here? It's Sarah here from DWP. We do have a dedicated member of staff called Paul Harris, who is leading the migration of migration over to universal credit on behalf of DWP Wales. You're absolutely right. It's all going through a test and learn phase. He's zooming all around the country to follow the test and learn outcomes and the evaluations. But I'm sure he'd be very welcome to come to a future Dangos event if you wanted to put one on specifically around move to UC.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
It's an offer we may very well grab and also grab for some other sessions like Welfare Rights Advisors Cymru.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to put his email address in the chat?
Yes, please. I think that would be very useful.
Yeah, I shall do that now. All right, thank you.
Sam?
Okay, we have another question. How different will things be in Wales to the rest of the UK?
Good question. Well, apart from kind of enormously better, of course, in so many different ways, in terms of benefits and income, not hugely, I don't think, because we don't have devolved powers in the way that Scotland and Northern Ireland do to change things, and they've both used their powers to improve. I think I would say the situation, but of course the Welsh government is also, it's fair to say, much more committed, it seems, to helping people with financial problems through all sorts of direct funding, through the discretionary assistance fund, through support for advice networks, for support through things like through support for things like Dangos, of course. So that probably means that people in Wales are a bit better supported than they are in England. And that covers things like the council tax support scheme, which in England is devolved to individual local councils who the power to change their own schemes, and most of which have been changed to make them less generous than the scheme in Wales. But the main benefit support system, we are stuck with the Westminster kind of model. We can't tweak that at all. Anything, Tom, you wanted to say on that?
Other examples like the discretionary social fund that becomes the discretionary assistance fund in Wales, and that's very much down to local where you happen to live, postcode lottery in England. There are areas where I think Scotland and Wales talk to each other, and so there might be the budget isn't there to do anything massive, the powers aren't there, but there may be potential where things wouldn't cost a huge amount of money. If it was felt that they would make a change, there might be some tweaks and twiddles that might come along. For example, payments of universal credit, which is a thing in Scotland, Northern Ireland, more choice around that. Is that something that could work in Wales? It obviously works in Scotland, Northern Ireland. It wouldn't cost a huge amount, but doing disability payments, for example, would be a huge cost to the budget, as it will be in Scotland.
Okay, any questions in, Sam?
Yeah, we have one. Any update on the energy bill support scheme alternate funding? It was announced that the application process would be available in January, and we're nearly out of January.
Very much nearly out of I don't know, actually, is the answer to that one, I'm afraid.
I've got to give the same answer, but I've certainly can have a look at see what we can find and maybe
we'll have a look at that and put an answer up on the Dangos forum, so that that becomes an information item there. So apologies for that.
That's a very good question.
Caught you out.
Eight
Okay.
good questions.
Another one. How much does the breathing space actually help? How long does it last? I mean, it's if somebody gets this kind of breathing space that Tom mentioned?
It's, as far as I understand, it's a 2-month space during which to give time, so everybody holds off sending the red letters and the procedures. They know that an advisor is involved. You might not be able to speak to that money advisor straight away, so it gives 2 months to work out and come back with an offer. That's the principle behind it, based on doing a budget statement and getting hold of the whole picture. That's the idea of it, I think.
It does put a hold on people taking action. That's the crucial part about it. So it does give that breathing space.
Okay, and one final one. Will people in Wales be better off in the future?
Pretty much the same question, I suppose. Well, will people in the UK be better off in the future under benefit scheme plans? It doesn't look as if this government's intending to improve the way in which the benefits have been cut over the last decade. I mean, welfare reform has been a process of cutting people's benefits since 2010, really. This government doesn't seem to have any plans to make things any better than it absolutely has to, I'm afraid. Whether the stuff that Welsh Government is able to do will make a difference. Again, as Tom says, we're budget limited. Okay, I think on that one, we have overrun just a little bit, but as I say, this was our kind of first experience of doing this one. Let me thank everybody for staying through to the end. Thank Tom for putting the very big list of things that are changing and going on together, and remind you that Dangos online training sessions are still running, and get your colleagues to sign up on them. The forum is now launched and will be a place to go to for kind of information and questions, and the next webinar is going to be on the 28th of February. And as I say, at the moment, that's intended to be looking at much more the practical help that's available towards issues around the cost of living. So thank you all once again. And with that, I shall turn all different bits and pieces off. And I'm just looking, there's one message that's popped up. Oh, lots of thank you messages. That's nice to see. Right. Okay, I'm going to end the recording now. That will be available shortly on the forum again, so you can share that with colleagues that weren't able to make today's session.